So this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube. If you have a problem with that, please feel free to leave now. Thank you. So hello everyone, welcome to another Open Cluster Management Community Meetings. Today is March 31st, 2023, and we have two topics on the agenda. The first topic is about a new enhancement that I'm working on. It's called ManagedRBAC. And then the second topic is on continuation on a topic about latency placement. So I'm gonna get started on the first topic. So this proposal is written by Shengjing, Josh, and myself. Um, as some of you are well aware, we have the managed service account API, which which creates a managed service account on the hub cluster. And then on the managed cluster side, there's an agent that watches for the cluster namespace and then create a service account on the managed cluster side. But then also projects the credential that you can use to connect to the managed cluster from the hub cluster in the cluster namespace. So this managed RBAC is kind of leverage partly leverage the managed service account. So the managed service account, one of the non-goals is to deal with authorization, and this essentially is the authorization part of that the managed service account. So to give a quick summary, so this proposal is about adding a new custom resource to OCM called the Managed RBAC. And then its purpose is to help distribute RBAC resources, such as cluster role binding, cluster role binding to the managed cluster. So similar to the managed service account, the managed RBAC resource should be in the cluster namespace associated with the managed cluster that you want to deliver these RBAC resources to. So the reason we want to create a new API like this is because we want to be able to easily distribute these RBAC resources from a centralized location to the managed clusters. Um, also want to make sure that if you delete them, they'll also get cleaned up. So it'll deal with the whole life cycle of the RBAC resources. So the managed RBAC API will protect those distributed RBAC resources from like unexpected modification and removal. So it kind of enforces the scope on the access. So it also where I talked about that earlier, it's enhanced the usability of the existing managed service account. So in the managed RBAC, in the subject fields where you define the bindings, usually you have user, a group, and service accounts. But in the managed RBAC, you're allowed to give it a managed service account as a kind for the subject as well. So the goal is, again, manage the lifecycle of RBAC resources across multiple clusters. You are allowed to use a subject for the bindings of the kind, the usual subjects, service count, user, and groups. And then in addition, you're allowed to use the managed service account. So how does it work when you give it a managed service account for the subject? Let's take a look at the proposal design. Actually, before I go into that, are there any questions so far? Questions or comments?
Hi, Mac. What's the different if we can use manifest work to deploy RBAC to the managed cluster. What's the advantage about this new API comparing the old way to do this?
Yeah, I think I should address that in this proposal, and I guess I didn't address that. It's essentially for ease of use, and also again the conversion of the subject. So there's a little bit smart where it's you're able to pass it. You create the managed service account, and then you can pass the same managed service account into the subject as well. So that I think those are the two main reasons that um, we want to create a resource like that. But I definitely think you have a point. Like, why should we create this when, as I will discuss later, mostly all it's doing is creating those manifest works that you talk about.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good discussion point. And so right now I have it in my own local branch, and then I will add what you mentioned into the enhancement proposal. And then when I create the PR, we can discuss it further in the PR. What do you think?
Yeah, great.
I
Okay.
have an additional question also.
Yep.
You said that we should ensure that the service account which are based on the managed service account are all present in the different clusters. Is that the responsibility of this new component, or we just have to be sure that we create the managed service account and then the controller responsible of managed service account will ensure that it is present in every cluster? And additional question is what will happen in case of desynchronization? So for example, in one of the managed cluster, someone go and deletes the service account, which is monitored, or let's say like which is monitored by the managed service account. What should happen in this case?
So just to repeat, the first question is how do we expect the managed service account to be created first before we use this managed RBAC? And what happened if the managed service account doesn't exist or something wrong with it? Is that the question?
Yes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So that is one of the reason why we have this managed RBAC. So the controller will do the validation on looking for the existence of this managed service account, which needs to live in the same namespace, the cluster namespace as the managed RBAC. So this managed service accounts need to exist, as well as in order to get the so right now I only have the name, and then the name, which is the managed service account, which we know it lives in the namespace. But a little down here, I explained that when you actually create the bindings, you have to replace the managed service account with the actual service account that's created on the managed cluster, and also the namespace of the managed cluster. And that's where the controller goes in and look and validate that namespace value, so that when the role binding gets created, it's pointing at the proper service accounts on the managed cluster. So I'm not sure if that answered your first question. And then does that answer your first question? I guess I should ask
Yeah, that answers the first question.
And could you repeat the second question? I didn't really understand that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the second question is if one of the service account in the managed clusters gets deleted, or the managed service account, if I understand correctly, it will create different service accounts into the managed clusters. And as we are expecting the service account to be present in all the managed clusters before doing the creation of the managed RBAC, what happens if one of the service account gets deleted? Do we expect the?
I see what you mean. So you're saying what happens when that's actually a really good question. You're saying once the managed RBAC is set up and it's pointing at the it's have the binding set up, but what happens if the managed service accounts get deleted? Then this managed RBAC is no longer valid, right? So that's actually a great point. And now I need to go back and enhance my proposal again. So I need to watch for the managed service accounts. So if this is gone, then I guess should it be deleted, or it wouldn't work anymore, right? On the managed cluster, these roles, it wouldn't work anymore. So yeah, and that's another topic for discussion, I guess. I will put it on the proposal, and then when I create the PR, we can discuss that in more details. I'll make sure to take a note of that. Thank you for that comment. That was excellent.
Maybe that could go through the conditions, because you didn't detail all the different possible conditions, but the one that you put an example here is all RBAC presence. So I don't know if there should be like special conditions, like not all are none or something like that. Non-RBAC presence, or just managed service account not present, or I don't know.
Yeah, maybe something leverage the condition here saying the managed service account went missing instead of doing a hard delete on the all the resources. So hopefully it gives a chance for the user to recover. Like maybe they did a mistake, maybe they can recreate the managed service account, and then whatever leverages this managed RBAC for their whatever they're doing to make it work, so that he can actually recover the managed service account. That's actually a really good point as well. Thank you.
Hi, Mac. I have a question. So in the subject section, can users specify a service account instead of managed service account?
Yes, the subject allows for the typical subject kinds like group, service account, and users.
Okay, that's great.
Okay, I'm gonna continue. That was some excellent comments. So this is one of the sample of the managed RBAC. You can define the cluster role, which has a bunch of rules, and then you can define the roles, which in this case is separate. It's a array of role which separate by the namespace. So you can give it different namespaces and have different role per the namespaces. And then the subject that we already gone quite a bit of details on. Again, you can have the managed service account or the traditional groups SA and user. So the managed RBAC resource is expected to be created under the cluster namespace. And then we're also proposing adding the controller, of course, to watch for the RBAC and reconcile the RBAC, manage RBAC. So when it reconcile, it creates a manifest work with the payload of the cluster role, the roles, and then the role binding and the cluster role bindings with the subject. In the special case of managed service account, it'll convert it to a SA. And then when we create the manifest work, it has the ownership of pointing at the managed RBAC. So if the managed RBAC gets deleted, the manifest work gets deleted, and then all the payload on the managed cluster will get deleted and cleaned up as well. So that is essentially it for my proposal. Any questions before I do a quick demo? Question or comments?
Mike, I have a question. So for this example, will an cluster rule binding be created, or
Yeah.
will make a cluster rule binding be created?
Yes, it will create a cluster role binding with the subject of the SA and then pointing at the cluster role that gets created. And one thing I forgot to mention is the name of the cluster role and the roles is the same as the name of the managed RBAC. This is similar behavior to the managed service account.
Okay, so I just thought it will create a role binding in the managed service account, the service account namespace, but bind to the cluster role. So there will not any cluster scope, cluster role binding be created.
Oh, there is the cluster role binding. That is the binding is on the subject of the whatever subject that you give for this cluster role.
So if there's a cluster role in the spec, there will be a cluster role binding to bind
Yes.
the service account, right? Okay.
Yes. So yes. So the another thing that I should mention in this spec is, I guess, the cluster role and the roles are optional. So you can either have the cluster role or the roles or both, but you must have at least one of them, or otherwise there's nothing to do.
Okay, so I'm just thinking, is there a scenario that we only want to create a cluster role, but we only want to use the role binding to bind it to a service count instead of a cluster rule? I'm not sure if it's if it makes sense, but just yeah.
I get it. I understand. I get it. So how I'll mention that as well, and then we can discuss the redundancy, I guess, of of what you just mentioned. That's a great point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick demo. So on the left side, I have a hub cluster. On the right side, I have a managed cluster that is registered to the hub cluster. The managed cluster is called cluster one. So in the cluster one namespace, I have already created a managed service account. And then on the right side, we can see the service account is created to reflect the managed service account on the hub cluster. So let's look at so it's the same example that I have in the proposal. And the subject is managed service account. So when I apply this managed RBAC, it will create the manifest work with the payload of the cluster role binding, the role, and the role binding. And we can see that the subject went from a managed service account to a service account with the name and then the namespace properly calculated. So when you can see that it's trying to create a cluster role of this. So you can see that it exists, and that is just how manifest work doing its magic. And then another example is the traditional kind subject, not the managed service count, but just a service count or user or group. So when you do that, you can see the same thing. So the cluster role binding, the role binding, and then let's look at here. And then when you delete the ManagedRBAC, so it gets cleaned up on the managed cluster as well, because it'll clean up the manifest work. And then it clean up the manifest work, so the managed cluster payload is deleted as well. So that is basically it for the enhancement proposal and the demo. There were some great comments and questions. Any more comments and questions?
Hi, Mike. I know this API is about the authorization on managed cluster. So I have a question. Who has the permission to create the managed RBAC resource on the hub? And how can we control the permissions?
Yeah, that's a great point. So right now, I just naively assume the cluster admin has the permission on the hub, but you're saying the cluster admin on the hub might not have permission to create some of these RBAC on a managed cluster. Is that the concern?
For example, if we have this new API, maybe our add-on manager running on hub cluster can leverage it. For example, the add-on manager can create a managed RBAC and manage the service account on the hub cluster, and then to get some permissions. But the add-on manager actually does not run as a class admin role on the hub. So I don't think it can create such kind of resource on the hub.
I see. So I guess I didn't talk about the real motivation of why we want to add this managed RBAC. So right now in our Argo CD push model, using some controllers that we have, we bring back from the managed cluster side, we bring back a credential to the hub cluster, and that credential is actually always a cluster admin. So the Argo CD will use that cluster admin credential and apply resources. So Argo CD is always using in that particular integration scenarios. Argo CD is always using cluster admin. So we wanted to leverage the managed service accounts so that we can Argo CD can use that service account to connect and apply resources to the managed cluster. But then we want to limit the scope using some type of RBAC. So that's why this managed RBAC API is being proposed to sort of try to limit the scope of Argo CD in that particular push model integration. So yeah, that is the reason why we're doing it, and that's why we were okay with just having the having the cluster admin permission, but I don't know how I can how we can make it work for the add-on as well. Yeah.
Maybe we can introduce the approval process for this resource.
Okay.
You know, the CSR, when we create CSR, actually nothing will be done until the CSR is approved by someone. So maybe in the future we can introduce a similar mechanism for it. Only the class admin can approve it, but anyone can create it.
I see. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So besides registration, do we have another similar components or API that does generate the CSR and then ask for approval before having the privilege to work on it?
I have no idea right now.
Okay. Okay. I'm also not too super expert of the add-on framework. Does it like if we're gonna add that type of approval CSR capability, that means we probably need to add like do we need like an add-on agent, and then so it lives on the managed cluster and to create the CSR after seeing the managed RBAC gets created. Is that how it works? And this
yeah, so I think there's some enhancement proposal for the managed service accounts. One of the enhancement is to introduce the approval process. For example, we can add a new field on the spec, or someone can set the status. Only the cluster admin can set the approved status in this in this CR. So we don't have to leverage CSR. We only need someone to add a approved field, set the value is approved is the status of this CR. Then the controller can create the manifest work to apply the rule and rule binding for this managed service account.
Yeah, that's actually great. Do you know? Okay, maybe we can take that offline because I didn't see it when I went into. Is it a PR or is it already?
No, I think
Oh,
there's
okay.
a Google Doc.
Oh,
You can scan it and send it by Slack.
okay. I think I should reference that that discussion as well in the enhancement. Thank you.
Yeah, one comment is very nice design, very nice proposal, and very great team.
Thank you.
Well done on that. There is something that you that the previous question was raising, and I think it could be interesting to create either an issue or proposal is about what you have understood first, which is like, should we have roles for people who can create, manage RBAC on it? So basically having giving permissions to some users to be able to create ManagedRBAC for some list of clusters. And that could be another level, and that could be also interesting. I don't know if we should put this in an issue or something like that to track that. Because as I understood, right now, it's only cluster admin that can create this kind of things. And if we want to delegate to cluster managers roles who can manage a specific list of clusters, we will not be able to do that right now.
Yep, exactly. Thank you for the comment.
So I have a question about this. Why? So currently it is still like per cluster, right? We need to create it per cluster, a managed RBAC, and it has to be like per service account or per managed service account. I think do you think it's more useful if it is like based on a cluster set or based on the placement, we create a managed RBAC, but not a per cluster resource?
Yes, I think that will be quite useful. You know what's funny is at the beginning of the proposal, Shangjing and Josh both had the placement reference. Maybe not the cluster set, but definitely had the placement reference. But then over time, they removed it. So I'm gonna go check back on them and why the discussion is maybe they want to simplify it, maybe they want to follow the exact same principle as the managed service account. But yes, that was definitely one of the ideas, having the placement reference so that it's more useful, where you can create many of these managed RBACs into scatter out to multiple managed clusters. So the user or whoever using it doesn't have to define a managed RBAC per namespace, so to speak.
Yeah. Another thing that I think it's an alternative, but I'm not sure whether it is being discussed, is in the API spec. Do you think that we need to define the permissions in that as an embedded spec, or maybe the user could like create the cluster role and roles on the hub and just reference the permissions here? Will that be more easier to use for the user because they just need to create the legacy role and cluster role and specify the bindings here? Yeah, I mean, I just trying to think whether it is more user friendly.
Yeah, I think that was considered as well. But then for I guess one of the counter argument either Josh or Shanshin have was creating those dummy cluster role on the hub cluster might not be ideal, because if it's maybe it's not being used because it doesn't have any real binding, but it's still a cluster scope resource, and maybe there's some policy or something that's saying, hey, don't create these object like that just for reference. But yeah, I will double check back with them and discuss with them as well and see how come we don't use references. But I can say the rules and the subject here are taken from the Kubernetes APIs. So hopefully, like, the definition is not something that we created brand new. But we did create these cluster role and roles in the namespace. So I definitely see your point as well. Thank you, PJ. I'll put that in the enhancement proposal as well.
Thank you.
I wonder if Mario show up. Oh, yeah, Mario didn't show up. So that's basically all. Any other last minute question for this topic?
It was largely addressed in the previous comments about surrounding that only cluster admin had been given consideration for creation of this managed RBAC custom resource. So I'll just throw out the more general question of, have any other considerations been made towards the mitigation or prevention of unintended privilege escalation? When you end up starting to toy with RBAC, it needs to be handled delicately.
Yeah, I don't think there is, because it's assumed that the cluster admin on the hub cluster, because it's a cluster admin and have access to all the managed cluster namespace, he can already create the manifest work, which is the main facility in this proposal, to either elevate the privileges or escalate the privileges on the managed cluster already. So providing this, at least for cluster admin, providing this managed RBAC is more like a convenience tool. We're not, most of the privilege escalation is done by manifest work, actually, and manifest work itself can self-escalate, I think, by creating role and role binding, because it has permission to these stuff. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, but I'm not doing something extra more insecure as of now. I'm just using the leveraging the existing API. So if you want to use a magnifying glass and focus on security, maybe manifest work is the one that we should analyze. But actually, now that you mention it, there's a good point, because manifest work can have the subject. We can pick the subject, right? Work executor group. This proposal. Yeah, you can have an identity on the work agent. So I can't think of it top of my head, but maybe will that help with anything, Youngler, with regarding the what you brought up earlier with the subject?
I think it helps, but I'm not quite sure how that can work with the RBAC permission API. Because by default, the user, I mean, we have a feature gate, but it's still in alpha stage. But if the feature gate is enabled, not everyone can create the manifest work with admin executor. The user need to have a certain permission to do that. But that applies to the controllers, like the add-on controllers. And if we have the permission, I mean, RBAC permission controller applies to RBAC permission controllers also. So that controller needs to have a high privileged permission to create the manifest work on all the clusters, I think. Otherwise, it cannot basically create the cluster role. I mean, it cannot create manifest work with cluster roles in the clusters.
I see. Yep. Okay. Thank you for the comment, Kijang, and thank you for bringing that up, Patrick. Okay, I think that was thank you all for the comments and questions. That was great. Any other topics that you want to discuss, Kijang?
No, thank you.
If not, thank you everyone for coming. Again, thank you for the comments. See you all next week or next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.